So welcome back to disc number 2, and we're going straight into a scene that we had to delete from the theatrical version of the film, again just for momentum reasons. When we cut the film theatrically, we decided that once the Fellowship were formed, we had to obviously give Frodo the Mithril vest and sting, but we wanted to leave Rivendell as quickly as possible, and that was purely a momentum decision of just wanting to punch the film forward to its next act, essentially. But we had shot this very lovely sequence where Aragorn is basically farewelling his mother's grave, because he was brought up in Rivendell. He was raised by the elves, which is something we never really got across strongly in the theatrical version, but scenes like this do illuminate on that side of his character. His mother died and was buried here in Rivendell, and so we used the moment of him farewelling his mother to reflect on his responsibilities, that Elrond is trying to encourage him to rise to his responsibilities, to become a leader of men. But Aragorn feels that men are so weak, that they're so flawed, which he acknowledges even though he is one himself, that he really doesn't know if he wants to go there. Rivendell was a set that was built at Kaitoki, which is a Wellington park, about 25 miles north of Wellington, and we built, like, this room is actually built inside the park. That's a real forest outside, and we were filming, and so I wanted Rivendell to have this very much indoor-outdoor kind of very close to nature.
Here's a pretty thing.
And we didn't mention it earlier, but when we first see Ian Holm here in Rivendell, he has the second stage age makeup, which Weta designed. Is it the stipple? Stipple makeup.
It's a stipple makeup, because obviously because Bilbo doesn't have the ring anymore, his aging process has accelerated.
I think you gave 1 million people a heart attack with a shot, Pete.
Very much like.
Yeah, Ian does this so wonderfully well. He's, he's just playing a character that hasn't really been able to finally give up the ring. And that was done with a rubber puppet that we morphed a rubber puppet into Ian's face for a few frames. So it's half Ian, half rubber puppet. It's like a combination of the two.
It's absolutely a moment from the book, though, that.
Yes, it is.
It is, where it says a shadow passes across Bilbo's face,
Yeah.
and suddenly Frodo sees something horrible
A
and grasping and
grasping
groping.
thing.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. No, definitely inspired by the book. But I think the scenes between Frodo and Bilbo are very, very special in the film. They are. It is really, in a sense, it's one of the reasons why Frodo does what he sets out to do, is because of the fact that he sees through Bilbo just how evil this ring is and why it must be destroyed. In the theatrical version, as you know, we just thundered straight out of Rivendell following the scene with Bilbo and Frodo, and we had shot this farewell. We actually shot a little bit more of it too. There's some more footage that doesn't appear on this version of the film either, where Elrond and Frodo have a little conversation. But this was what we thought was going to be in the film for quite some time, until at the very last minute we decided to trim it out. It's just nice because it allows Frodo a moment where he just can convey to us the enormity of what he's been thrust into, where suddenly he's been put in the spotlight, that he's the symbolic leader now. He's the ring bearer, the leader of the Fellowship. And it allows us this one last opportunity to see Aragorn and Arwen together. And as readers of the book know, that it's going to be quite some time in the story before we see the two of them together again. These are combinations of miniatures and matte paintings and various waterfalls photographed from different places in New Zealand. That ruin is a computer-generated ruin. I flew around in a helicopter with our aerial crew shooting these scenes. We had doubles that we took down to the South Island. And this is what we call our hero fellowship shot. It was done against blue screens with a scenic plate of the South Island of New Zealand. This is a great location. I really love this. It's just out of Tianau, near Lake Manapuri. And it's just a great part of the country. I really love filming this stuff.
We must hold this course west of the Misty Mountains.
Bill the pony.
If our luck holds,
We actually didn't have Bill for a while in the script.
No,
and then
Pony was added much later.
Pretty determined to stick Bill in, but Mark Aldesky didn't realise this, and when he came down one day, he saw this pony. He said, "What the hell's this pony doing?" We said, "It's Bill. Bill's back in."
The reason why we didn't
I
think we could
that's
have
right.
Bill was because of the problems of shooting on the mountains. That we thought, how on earth are we ever going to get a pony up onto these mountains? But we solved that by resorting to what's called the pantomime pony, which is simply to have a pony played by two people. Somebody's the front end and somebody's the back end. And in quite a few scenes, there's especially the scene in the snow where the Fellowship are walking. That's actually Bill the pantomime pony, the fake pony, which solved the problem of having to transport the real animal and all these far off locations.
We wanted this connection, of course, between Boromir and Merry and Pippin. It's very, very important for the end of the movie.
What is that?
nothing. It's just a wisp of cloud.
It's moving fast.
This was shot in a national park at the top of the South Island, and again it was a location actually that was offered up to us by our helicopter pilot, that we were flying around going somewhere else, and Bill the helicopter pilot said to me, I saw a really interesting place that I'd never seen before. It's on the side of a mountain about 15 miles away, and there's all these weird rock formations. And I said, I immediately got interested, and I said, well, could you fly us here now and give us a look? And he flew us over this location that you're seeing now, and this was it was amazing, with all these incredible weird rocks. It was something almost like out of Easter Island. And so I just thought, we've got to shoot something there. So I thought this scene ultimately would be a really good one to go back to that location. So we went back there and dumped the crew on top of this mountain and shot the scene.
Ian was really funny on one of the blooper outtakes. He emerges from behind the rock and he says, instead of spies of Saruman, he says spies of Star Wars.
This was a sequence that was shot on a mountaintop near Mount Aspiring. It was a real very high remote mountain, and the helicopters flew us in, dropped us off, and then they went off to park on the other side of the hill, so they weren't shot in sight of the cameras. But the helicopters were never that far away because the weather is so difficult up there, and it can change. It's so changeable that a storm could have suddenly swept in and stranded us on this mountain. So they were very close by in case they had to do an emergency evacuation.
And for that big ring close-up shot, Pete?
That was a large ring. It was a
how
ring
big was it?
about 6 inches in diameter, so we could get the ring close to the lens. We had a much bigger ring.
This scene, of course, is not in the book, although Boromir's temptation is in the book at the council.
Exactly in the book, and that particular line that we should suffer so much fate.
Fear and doubt.
Is of course in the one of the last things he says in the book.
Yes.
But it was too good not to play it this soon. We needed this. We needed this progression.
This was a shot that was almost one of the last things that we added to the film, that we wanted a sense of the crows returning to give the message to Saruman, and the model of the caverns below Isengard had already been packed away, so I got them to drag the model out and set it up again just to do this shot. And we did the blue screen with Christopher Lee very late as well. He flew back out to New Zealand to do that.
Mountain defeats you. Will you risk more danger?
Yeah, they're all miniatures.
All miniatures, yep. This was a huge big model that Alex Funky, our miniature DP, shot. One of the very first miniatures ever to be shot for the film.
Yes. This was a hellish studio shoot.
That's right.
The
Fran
worst
actually
studio.
directed quite a significant piece of this scene.
Well, John Mahaffey did it too.
Right. Yeah.
And, John really did it. So.
John Mahaffey, our second unit director, directed quite a bit of this scene with Fran. I think you were there too, weren't you?
I was there. There were rice flakes flying around and polystyrene, and the rice flakes would get wet and turn sort of gluey.
Yeah.
And
get everywhere.
It'd stick in the treads of your shoes, and
Your handbag was full of it.
it was horrendous. It
bag.
got into everybody's underwear.
What the hell were you doing in there?
No, I wasn't
were you doing?
personally checking it, but everyone reported it. It was a horror. And I said to Pete, you know, you've really got to come in and shoot some of this stuff because it's gassy and I don't want to be here anymore. And he said, no, I'm due. I have to run with the Olympic torch.
Yeah,
I don't want.
right.
I don't want to get. I don't want to get all that crap in my hair. And so, unfortunately, I got stuck there.
The great athlete.
That shot there of Legolas is actually on in real snow. It's weird because most of it's fake in a studio, but there was a couple of shots we didn't have, and so one day we were filming on a real mountaintop, a different scene, and I thought, well, I could get that shot that I want of Legolas breaking through the snow. So Orlando got to be the guy that had to do it in real snow. We buried him, we covered him over in snow, and he got to punch his way out as an insert for this scene, or even though everybody else was in polystyrene and rice flakes.
I'm fairly sure that in that shot of Saruman on top of the tower, where he's invoking the mountain, that you can see his bandaged finger.
Oh.
I'm pretty sure I can see a big
that's-
lumpy finger there.
You mean they missed it? You mean the critics,
I don't think the fans have
the
seen
anally
that.
retentive
No, we'll point it
mistake
out.
spotters
I think
missed
it's
it.
there.
The interesting thing about the spells that the two wizards are contending with here, with each other with, it's spoken in Quenya, an older Elvish dialect, and what's interesting is that Gandalf is actually saying, as he does in the book, sleep. He's asking Caradhras to go back to sleep, and one of the things I love about Tolkien is that the idea that there is a spirit even within the mountain, and what Saruman is doing is awakening that malice, the malice of the mountain, and Gandalf is trying to make it sleep.
Another scene trimmed from the theatrical version for pacing reasons is this nice little moment between Gandalf and Frodo that we wanted to really emphasize the fact that Gandalf is sensing his impending doom, that he doesn't want to go into Moria. However, because Frodo has now made a decision, he's going to go along with it, but he wants to just take an opportunity to warn Frodo that from here on in the journey is going to get more dangerous. And it's a scene we did with Ian McKellen. It was actually the last thing we shot with Ian for the Fellowship of the Ring. It was a pickup that we did after the completion of photography, and Ian flew out to New Zealand, and we shot the sequence in front of a blue screen, and we composited in the mountains behind them. It was done in the studio, and it was done literally on Ian's last day of being involved in the movie, and he flew home that afternoon.
Dwarf doors are invisible when closed. Yes, Gimli, their own masters cannot find
The little moment here between Legolas and Gimli is a little beat of the rivalry between dwarves and elves, which we did shoot for the movie, and we had to trim most of that stuff out for the theatrical version. It's obviously a very notable part of the book, the sort of antagonism between those two characters that slowly turns into friendship.
There is only starlight and moonlight.
The Gates of Moria used to be a very well-used road that the elves and dwarves would take in ancient times before they fell out. I always loved the idea that the door has this inscription that reflects moonlight. It's so that if the moon's out, then the letters, the markings on the door glow, which I always thought was really magical.
And that wide shot was your deliberate recreation of the Alan Lee painting of the
Yeah,
Moria door,
Alan's got a
wasn't it?
painting that's almost identical to this, and I just thought that's got to be what the Gate of Moria is like in the movie, so we deliberately tried to replicate it as closely as possible. Obviously, Tolkien himself designed the pattern of the gate, the symbols on the gate.
Nothing's happening.
There was a lot of concern about whether Gandalf should appear too much of a failure here, and I guess the slightly longer cut shows more of his frustration. But I actually always loved it. I thought that to make Gandalf fallible, to show that even though he's this spirit, he is inhabited in the body of an old man, he does forget things, he's not always perfect, I think was really nice for his character. It's anti-wizard in a funny kind of way. This was filmed on what's called the wet set, which is basically like a big swimming pool that was outside in Wingate, which was right next to a railway line. If you hear the real sound that we recorded on the day, it's just full of trains rumbling past the set. In fact, I think people could look out of the window of the train and actually see what we were shooting.
This little moment here was studio request from Mark Ordesky. Yes. Because he was worried about what the audience might think, would become of Bill.
What happened was, when he finally discovered that somehow Bill the pony had materialised, he said, "What happens to the pony?" And I said, well, in the book, he's released outside the mines of Moria, where all the wolves are howling and they're really hungry, and all Mark could see was this great horror that we were going to send Bill the pony off to be eaten by wolves.
I always wanted the Watcher to go and grab
Bill.
I thought that would be great if the little donkey was kind of like, ee-oh, ee-oh, and he was kind of pulled below the surface by a big, slippery, slimy tentacle.
No, that very lame line, "Don't worry, Sam, he'll find his way home," was our concession to the studio.
Yeah. That was done under duress.
It was, under protest.
The idea of giving the solving of the puzzle to Frodo, which some people sort of objected to because, of course, Gandalf himself solves it in the book, was basically because by this stage Frodo's starting to drop out of the story. And always one of the things we had to work very hard to do was to keep him in focus and keep him very proactive so that he's not just somebody who's being dragged along by other people.
It's the home of my cousin Balin, and they call it a mine. A mine!
There's a couple of shots there that are not John Rhys-Davies. They're another person in his makeup.
John had a very bad reaction to the prosthetic by this stage because he faced I think it began as a 5-hour or 4-hour prosthetic and ended up being 3 hours. I don't think it was ever less than 3 hours, was it?
Yes, the glue was giving him tremendous inflammation around his eyes.
He was so great at dealing with it.
And it got to the point where we couldn't shoot with him on consecutive days. We would have to shoot with John every 2 or 3 days to give him a break.
The Watcher is one of those scenes that was a little bit of a fight with the studio, that there was always a feeling that it was unnecessary, that we could just have the door open and they'd just go straight into the mine and carry on going to the mine. But I loved the notion of the scene. I thought the film needed some more, a good monster sequence at this point in time.
Yeah.
And so I kind of fought for it. And obviously it's a little bit more than it was in the book even, because in the book you don't see the creature as clearly as you do here. You just see the tentacles coming out of the water. But so this was a fight, I have to say, to retain this sequence in the script. But fortunately, as they did in most situations, the studio finally relented and let me do what I wanted to do, which I was always very grateful for.
One of the most important things it does, of course, is gives them no choice. It locks them in there, and we would have had to have... Yeah,
I mean, I love the idea that they decide they don't want to go through the mine when they see how nightmarish it is, and then they have no choice. They get entombed in there. They have no choice at all, but they have to walk through the mine. And I love the idea it's a 4-day journey, that they're walking under the mountain. It's just such a great evocative sequence. It's probably the best sequence from the book, really. It's something that everybody remembers from the book. So it naturally became one of the major set pieces of the film.
I think it's one of the most well written chapters of the book.
Yes, I agree.
It's beautifully written. And musically, Howard took his cue from the dwarves and utilising a male choir to...
That was Peter, actually.
Take us through
What happened, I remember we were having lunch in your place, and you were talking, you and Howard, Fran, were talking about the choral, the concept of choral music, especially in this place. I think you'd found some great stuff in the temp track that you'd used, and Howard had really enjoyed it, and... Pete, you were talking about some of the women vocalists that were around and things like this, and I said all the dwarves were male, and that's when your eyes lit up and said, a male choir. You would think of the great Welsh mining choirs. And that, it took off from there, and then, of course, Howard managed to find incredible Polynesian choir here in New Zealand.
We have a sequence coming up which was cut, revealing more information about the Mithril vest which Bilbo gave Frodo, and we felt that the Mithril vest has been established well enough back in the Rivendell bedroom scene, and we didn't really need to dwell more on it, which is why this was trimmed out. But it's got a nice mood to it, and I love the idea that there's this huge Mithril mine right in the middle of the mountains, the actual mine shaft where the Mithril has been dug out of the mountain. Sort of a seemingly endless hole, which I found pretty creepy. It was one of the first miniatures that we ever shot for the film.
Thorin gave him. Oh, that was a kingly gift. Yeah.
And as readers of the book will know the story that the shirt of Mithril rings was given to Bilbo by Thorin, which is one of the episodes from the book The Hobbit, and we sort of make reference to it in this piece of dialogue. The fork in the road, the three-way crossroads is in the book, and I always like that idea that Gandalf kind of forgets. We wanted to play Gandalf as being human, really.
Fallible.
To be fallible, that he wasn't just a wizard that knew what to do all the time. And I love the idea that he hadn't been in there for hundreds of years, and he knew his way through, but he just couldn't quite remember which of these three tunnels to take. The Gollum that you're seeing here is almost our prototype Gollum. When you see him in the Two Towers, he will look a little bit different to this. This was done, early, and we have since developed him and changed him slightly. So at some point, we'll probably go and redo that shot there for some later DVD edition of the Fellowship, so that it matches up with with the Gollum that we're going to see in the Two Towers. We trimmed a little reference here out of the theatrical version which refers to Gollum as Schmeagol, and we trimmed it out because we didn't need it in this film, but I'm including it here because this whole concept of Gollum's original name being Schmeagol is something that's very important in the Two Towers, and so I wanted it back in this version of the film, so hopefully people will get to look at this prior to seeing the Two Towers, which is obviously coming onto screens very shortly.
It's a pity Bilbo didn't kill him when he had the chance.
This scene's really interesting because although, because it's done with forced perspective, they're not looking at each other when they're saying these lines. When you see two shots of them making eye contact, they're in fact, many feet apart looking at quite different points. This scene is really the heart of the book.
It's the heart of
It actually happens in Bag End, doesn't it?
Yes, in the
does,
shadow of the past chapter.
But this is a much more appropriate place for it in terms of the cinematic story that we're telling.
This is the one place where we felt we could stop. And the key thing about this is that what Gandalf's saying to Frodo is so utterly important, because this is where you're getting a sense that he knows that he is not going to be around for this boy.
Yes.
And not going to be around to help him.
Yes.
And I think Ian played that beautifully.
There are two great messages that come through in this scene. The first one is do not be too eager to deal out death and judgment.
Yes.
Which is Tolkien's humanitarianism, really. It's the spirit of the book. It's forgiveness, and through forgiveness is redemption. And in that sense, it's quite a Christian
and also
notion.
That is the role of a greater being, too.
Yes, there are other forces at work in this world besides the will of evil. And the other great message in this scene is all you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
Is that way?
He's remembered.
No. But the air.
That is the essence of
Well, that's about free will, which is again plays directly to the powerful themes that underlie the story, which really inform Tolkien's view of life. His Catholic faith.
The sequence in the Dwarrowdale Hall was inspired by a painting that Alan Lee did for the centenary edition of The Lord of the Rings, wonderful watercolour painting of these huge towering columns that seem to go on and on forever, with these tiny little group of people walking at their base. And we looked at that painting while we were writing the script, long before we ever met Alan Lee, and we always took huge inspiration from the visual look of Moria. And then that's the image there. And then much later, for my birthday, Fran gave me a present, and I opened it up, and it was the original painting that she'd persuaded Alan to part with it. And I've now got that original painting on the wall of in our house.
I love the scale.
It's
so huge.
just scale's fantastic. Of just showing tiny people with this huge architecture. It's mind-boggling. And then to think that it was carved out of the interior of a mountain. I mean, I just love the idea that it was once solid rock, and yet the dwarves chipped away at the rock and created this hall of columns. It's just, I just like thinking about it. It's really exciting.
Here lies Balin, son of
Balin's tomb is pretty much as described in the books. The shaft of white light. We really wanted to be as accurate as possible to the descriptions. That we felt that even though we were taking liberties sometimes with characters and with dialogue and with the way that the story unfolded, we didn't really ever want to take liberties with the world that the story was in. So we were always very strictly accurate as much as possible, anyway, to the places, so that at least fans of the book would feel that they were seeing Middle-earth come to life.
Underneath this, you can hear John Rhys Davies actually speaking some Dwarvish, I believe, except for the choral pieces. It's the only Dwarvish that we hear.
And you're only
fiendishly difficult language.
You're going to see Vigo in profile here because he whacked himself in the eye with a surfboard and gave himself a black eye, so he had to shoot him for about a
went
week.
surfing with the hobbits.
This was shot on a Monday, and he'd come in on the Monday morning, and he had this huge swollen face. That shot there, he had this huge swollen face on the right side, and so I had to shoot everything from the left, which is why you see some rather slightly awkward shots of Vigo, because normally I wouldn't choose to do that, but I had no choice in this instance. The well is used a little differently. It's sort of how we worked on the screenplay, is we'd take all these ideas of Tolkien's and we'd find slightly different ways to use them, because Pippin throws a pebble down a well at some point, not in Balin's tomb, it's in another place in Moria. But we took that idea and we enlarged it to make it this kind of key moment in Balin's tomb when the orcs are alerted to their whereabouts. On the walls of Balin's tomb are dwarven runes. If you look closely, all around the tomb, like on every single wall, is carved the story of the history of Moria and the dwarves in Moria, and it's all there. If you understand runes, you can sort of read the odd word here and there. We use some miniatures, obviously, to create the large caverns in Moria.
Frodo.
The orcs, or the goblins, I mean, I don't know whether they're goblins. We called them either goblins or Moria orcs.
That's the same.
The same thing, essentially. We wanted to create a sort of a race of feral creatures that live underground. They're a little different to the orcs that you see elsewhere in the movie. That they're much more
Subterranean.
they're subterranean, large round eyes, which would have developed so they could see in the dark.
Very sickly skin.
Yeah, pale skin. Yeah. So we did put a lot of thought, and their armor is quite sort of cockroachy. And they've even, on some of their gloves, they have little hooks, which is what allows them to crawl up and down the walls.
Somebody asked me why Glamdring wasn't glowing. I must admit I didn't know why.
Probably due to budgetary cutbacks.
Budgetary cuts. Not enough blue left.
The intention with the fighting was to make you feel like you were part of it, that I wanted to really get in there with the camera. It was all shot handheld. I often used to shoot this fight on Saturdays when I was shooting Monday to Friday with the main unit, and I'd come in on the Saturdays and shoot some of the stuff with the second unit. And then through the week, Jeff Murphy, one of our second unit directors, was also shooting a substantial part of this fight as well. He shot most of the shots with the cave troll were done by Jeff. There's actually a few cave troll shots that we trimmed out of the movie, which we can get to look at here. A little bit involving Sam, which I always liked, but again, we just felt the cave troll sequence went on a little bit too long, so we nipped and tucked a few shots out. But they were actually shots that we'd already finished. We'd done all the effects for them, so we were able just to pop them straight back into here. This little moment between Boromir and Aragorn is significant too, because it does show that their respect for each other is growing following the earlier antagonism between the two characters. The cave troll was a character that we developed very early. Like, he existed at least a year before we started shooting, if not actually more than that, really 2 years before we started shooting. We had tests of the cave troll. And I always loved the idea of a monster that sort of felt real. I wanted to not make it an over-the-top movie monster, but a creature that you could sort of believe in. So we wanted to make him a little stupid. You know, like, he's not really evil, but he's just fallen into bad company. He's like a big, simple kid who has just got bad friends. And, you know, and he comes in waving his hammer around, but I wanted there to be some sympathy for the troll, because I always imagine that the troll has a mother, you know, and she's probably got his bed turned down and a glass of warm milk by his bed, and he's not going to come home. Oh. You know, and I always just felt quite sad, really, that...
He is quite empathetic when he dies.
Yeah.
Which is, I think...
it is in the book.
That's a testament to Randy Cook, is it not?
Yes.
Did Randy drive...
Yeah, well, Randy, who's our animation supervisor, I mean, he and I are big Ray Harryhausen fans, and we always regarded this as being our Harryhausen scene. That the one thing we're doing differently is we're using handheld cameras, whereas the old Harryhausen movies like Jason and the Argonauts and Sinbad, the cameras were always locked off, completely static, because it was just it was the only way that those effects could be achieved in those days. But we thought it would be great to do what's essentially a wonderful Harryhausen monster fight, but do it with handheld cameras, so you get much more of that documentary sort of feel. So if you look at the troll fight, every single shot, the camera's handheld, and it gives it that little bit of life and energy. But, you know, the gags are all Harryhausen gags, really. You know, throwing stones at monsters, he did that. You know, throwing spears, jumping on their backs. You know, it's all been done before, and in a way we thought it was just our opportunity to pay homage to the great old Harryhausen films. Once Merry and Pippin jump on the back of the troll, they become CG characters. They're little computer-generated Merry and Pippin.
Frodo!
You know, we took our lead from the book again with the mithril vest gag, where Frodo gets stabbed in the chest by the vest, but we just milked it a little bit more. I mean, that's often what we did in the film, was to take our lead from sections of the book, but then sort of to milk them for all they're worth in a much more of a movie kind of way. So. We did a lot of pre-visualization on the scene, which is to plan it before we shoot it. It's quite complicated, but I'm sure there'll be something on the documentary accompanying this DVD which will explain that in more detail. Creating the mithril vest was tricky too, because it is such a magical thing, yet we had to create something real. But we did it. We made essentially a chainmail vest out of tiny rings of chainmail, the finest sort of wire that we could bend into loops, and we had it silver coated, sort of a platinum.
It was
colour.
a nightmare for Nyla. They had to get the measurements so right before they cut it.
And it took somebody weeks and weeks and weeks to put all this chainmail together. That those are all tiny little metal loops assembled by hand, one at a time.
Yeah.
You are full of surprise.
It is actually very beautiful to look at. It's a very beautiful garment.
To the Bridge of Khazad-dûm.
What you're seeing here is you're seeing a completely computer-generated image. The Fellowship are computer-generated. The environment, the columns, the architecture are completely computer-generated. That often in movies, that's a rare thing, that to have shots of which nothing is real. This is another one where everything is just done in the computer. And we had no ability to build a set this big, of course, because it's sort of basically endless. And what we did is we built 2 bases of columns. So if you look at all those columns and just imagine the bases of them, we had 2 of those in the studio against black. So when we cut to the live action stuff that we're looking at here, you're just seeing we're filming our 2 big column bases is all that we have, and we're just looking at the same two columns over and over again in the various angles, and then obviously intercutting that with some computer wide shots. This is a sequence which again is enhanced from what's in the book, that it was really, the introduction of the Balrog didn't happen quite in this way, but we just wanted to make a sort of a rollicking Indiana Jones type sequence out of it, really, to have some fun with it.
What is this new devilry?
It's a great Tolkien line. What is this new devilry?
I love the look in Ian's eyes. I love the way that he's reacting to this Balrog. It's fantastic.
And in Legolas's eyes,
Yes.
and his close-up that's coming.
Because that is the one thing that elves would fear in
Is the
Middle-earth,
Balrog, yeah.
is the Balrog. A Balrog. The
Yeah.
Balrog is actually strangely enough, is actually a spirit, a Maya spirit, very similar to Gandalf, who's also a Maya spirit. So these two are actually beings of a similar power, but at opposite ends of the...
In our screenplay,
scale.
it said something along the lines of the Fellowship run from the Balrog down a staircase
Was
and
two
across
lines.
the bridge.
I know.
It literally goes from the Balrog appearing in the hallway and the goblins running to the bridge in like 2 lines. And what happened
And the
with
fools
the
fell for
development
it.
of the scene is to the horror of the studio, I think, is that it obviously developed into the biggest effects sequence in the entire movie. But I think it's a great scene, and the way that it came together is that Alan Lee drew the bridge. I mean, the staircase. We call it the staircase, really, where the Fellowship run down, and we were just going to get one shot of them running down. And Alan had drawn this picture exactly as you see it in the movie here, exactly in pencil sketch, except he'd had this broken bit of bridge, and Alan just said to me, "Oh, I thought it'd be fun to have a broken bit because then they could jump over it," and that really sparked my imagination going of, well, what else could you do with a broken piece of bridge? What, say you were being shot at with arrows as you were trying to jump over it? So you keep complicating it. And then Randy Cook was very instrumental in taking a lot of the ideas that I came up with, and then he did an animatic, and this was about a year and a half before we started shooting, and he developed an animatic, which is a simple computer version of the scene, just done on a home PC. And Randy came up with all sorts of extra ideas, and we eventually, between the group of us, we worked this scene up to the state that you see it now, and we had it pretty well prevised with this computer animatic pre-visualization.
Pete's got to take credit for no one tosses a dwarf. I'm sorry, we're disowning that line, aren't we?
No one tosses a dwarf. You see, dwarves, it's a very British thing. It's something Americans don't know too much about, but England has a sport called dwarf tossing. In fact, one of our scale doubles, one of our little 4-foot-high guys that Kieran, who came from England, he had been tossed several times in his career.
I thought it was an Australian invention.
I think it's English.
I think it is English in the...
No, the Australians do gumboot tossing.
No,
they do dwarf
have
tossing
dwarf,
too.
Dwarf
They
tossing.
do dwarf tossing, yeah. Well, it probably spread to the
Anyway.
the more crasser members of the Commonwealth.
But I thought it had a completely different meaning in England.
No, to toss a dwarf is a sport. You pick up a dwarf and you throw the dwarf.
No, that's
as-
the Americans have a
as far as
completely
you can.
different understanding of that
Oh,
phrase,
is that what it is?
particular phrase.
Anyway, can be
I don't think it's a sport in America.
distinctly un-Tolkien.
Very un-Tolkien.
I think it usually appears in quite a different type of video frame.
Alex Funky did a wonderful job of lighting these miniatures that we're looking at. The only computer part are the people running, and the column that crashes down is the only computer part. Everything else is a miniature.
This is one of my favourite shots. I was so excited to see this.
This is a great shot. The music is wonderful here too.
The Balrog, it was always difficult. He was a real problem because of the way that Tolkien... I love the heat haze. The heat haze really sells it.
I love the fire under the skin. I never envisaged that. I think
Well, that was one of the
fantastic.
ideas early, is to have cracks in the skin.
Oh, I love
that was on the original
It's
maquette.
brilliant.
But
And I love the soot.
well, we tried to create the feeling of the shadow and flame. This is a great
Yeah.
shot. I love this. These are computer fellowship. The people you're looking at running here are completely computer generated. They're not real at all. But you can look at the way their cloaks are swinging around, and their just the way that they look. We're getting the computer people looking pretty real now as we go through the film. We've got a lot more of them in the second and third movie coming up. But the Balrog was described as a creature of shadow and flame, and we decided to try to use shadow and flame for obvious reasons to provide his look. So we have this black smoke oozing off him and the flame, and not really see too much of the physical Balrog beneath that.
And he's got wings.
He has got wings. I read the book and I imagine Tolkien's describing wings. I don't know what the big fuss is about.
Yes.
Ian has spoken many times of acting this scene to a ping pong ball.
Yeah, he had a really nightmarish time with this scene because he was having to confront something. He didn't know what the Balrog looked like. He didn't have a clue. We were in a little studio right beside the airport. Planes were taking off all the time, and Ian had to kind of do his Balrog confrontation, and it was tough. It was hard.
Some people say, why does Boromir stop and why doesn't anyone go and help him? And there's two answers. One is that they're actually they are actually far away, but also that the rest of the bridge is in a bad way and could collapse at any second.
Oh,
but what I love in the book,
I didn't realise that.
it's what it is in the book.
Ah, okay.
What didn't you do that for that reason?
I thought he stopped him because he's carrying the ring. He can't afford to have him.
Yeah, well, that. I love the bit in the book where later on when Frodo says, if it hadn't been for us, he says to Faramir, they wouldn't have run. He was talking about Aragorn and Boromir. If it hadn't been that they had to look after us, they would not have run. Love that. I wonder if we can get that in.
And also on that line, fly you fools, which I think Ian does it so beautifully, that he lets go rather than falls.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
He wants them
That's
to.
the choice
Yeah.
he makes at that moment, is to...
It's the choice he knew he was going to have to make from the moment he understood the mind of Saruman.
Yes.
This was another helicopter location where we had to fly all of our actors in.
Didn't
And
Sean walk in?
we did this very early. No, Sean flew in. We did this very early in the shoot. I mean, we shot this sequence long before we ever shot Moria. Long before. In fact, Ian McKellen hadn't even arrived in New Zealand to start working when this scene was shot. So they were all reacting to Gandalf's death without having ever even seen Ian McKellen dressed up as Gandalf. Like, this was late 1999, and Ian didn't start work on the movie till January 2000. So it was one of those weird scenes where we found ourselves filming this without having shot anything leading up to it at all.
It was not Orlando's first day, but probably his third day of shooting ever, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. And I love the way that Orlando does that reaction where he reacts to
that's
the
great.
death. It's like an elf. Because elves are immortal, we wanted to give the impression that he didn't quite understand death. And he was having to somehow grapple with the concept of death because it was foreign to him.
I remember Elijah saying you gave him a great note here, Pete, when you asked him to turn. You said, I want your grief to be frightening. I want it to be so powerful.
I want it to scare an audience to
Yeah.
see what's the look on your face, yeah. Lothlórien was created in a forest called Paradise down in the South Island, and the big trees are actually made of rubber. if you look at this forest, the trees that are nearby, the smaller ones are real, but the large, big ones are actually big rubber trees that we took down there, because the one thing that Paradise didn't have is it didn't have trees that were large enough, that had a big enough girth, so we brought our own ones in. But the rest of the forest is real.
All who look upon her fall under her spell.
Introducing Galadriel and the concept of Lothlórien was difficult. It was also difficult in terms of the story of the film, because it's one of those situations where if you were writing an original screenplay, Lothlórien probably wouldn't exist, because you'd be wanting to keep the momentum up straight through to the climax. That we always regarded Lothlórien as being potentially problematical because of the way that it suddenly stops the narrative of the film. And we did experiment a lot with different ways to present the elves and how they introduced, and at some point we had a sequence where the goblins from Moria actually pursue them right the way into the woods and are killed by the elves, and we shot most of that scene. It's never made it into a cut, but it does exist. This is a totally alternate version of the entry into the Lothlórien woods. We ultimately decided that this moment on the flat was, for pacing reasons, something that we wanted to delete, so we shot an alternate scene which has ended up in the theatrical version of meeting Haldir, played by Craig Parker, and journeying on through the woods. But we initially wanted to make it more difficult for the Fellowship, that as in the book, they're not immediately allowed access into Lothlórien, because the elves can sense that there is an evil. And we also made the sequence about Frodo's headspace, that he's sitting there and he's just feeling now that because the Fellowship are encountering a problem due to him, that they're not allowed sanctuary because he has this evil with him, that they're starting to turn against him. They're obviously not, but it's just what Frodo's imagining. He's feeling this weight of responsibility, and he's feeling the pressure, obviously, now that he's lost Gandalf. And so it's nice. It's a good scene for people to have a look at, because it's not bad. It does start to put more pressure on Frodo, which obviously helps as we start to head towards his decision to leave the Fellowship. And we mentioned Galadriel by name. In the movie that was screened, Galadriel just refers to herself by name when she says, and I shall remain Galadriel.
Don't carry the weight of the dead.
You will follow me.
The thing that I like about this too is that we get to see the elvish city from the outside. Obviously in the theatrical version we just jump straight in there, but we get to see this shot of what the elvish city of Caris Galadon actually looks like from afar.
Elvendom on earth, realm of the Lord Celeborn, and of Galadriel, Lady of Light.
These were miniatures, large model trees, huge big model trees that were shot, and the people were composited, and they were computer people that were walking up the stairs there.
This was, Paul is saying, did a lot of conceptual artwork for this.
Yes, yeah. Paul did a couple of wonderful paintings of Lothlórien that we really took the look from his paintings.
Yes.
The way that the lighting happened. The Lothlórien sequence was always very difficult for us in the movie, because it's a point in the film where you naturally would be wanting to increase the pace and be building up a sense of momentum to head towards the climax of the movie. But obviously the sequence in Lothlórien is very, very significant in the book. It's significant in the movie as well, because it's the point that Frodo has to decide whether or not he really is best staying with the Fellowship or leaving, and Galadriel obviously gives him advice. But we always had pacing problems, and when we cut the theatrical version, we wanted to make it as brief as we possibly could so we could propel the story along. But I felt that this cut of the meeting with Galadriel and Celeborn was actually better, in that it starts to suck you into the world of the elves and the world of Galadriel in a way that I think is ultimately a little bit more effective than the truncated version that ended up in the movie. Martin Shokaz plays Celeborn. Galadriel's a very enigmatic character, and we decided to really emphasise what is in the book, which is the sense that she herself is severely tempted by the ring, that the ring represents to her a threat, a test of her strength, of whether she can withstand it or not. She's difficult to visualise because I think everybody who reads the book comes away with a slightly different impression of her in your mind, which is obviously the beauty of a book that allows you to put your own vision of Galadriel into your own private movie. But showing elves on the film was always very difficult, and Galadriel more so than most, but Kate Blanchett obviously does such a wonderful job.
Kate's on 6-inch disco platform heels.
Yes.
Which I think is quite funny, because she needed the height. Galadriel is described as tall as any of the men. She also needed it. She felt she needed it, the stature.
And this moment we were looking at here is the first beat in the relationship between Gimli, who's obviously so suspicious of the elves. He doesn't want to be there, but he now looks upon Galadriel with in a very renewed way, and we'll be seeing more of that later on. I like the way that Celeborn too just doesn't let the Fellowship get away with anything. He basically tells them off and says how they've failed, and that obviously impacts on Aragorn, who feels a certain amount of responsibility. If you look into Galadriel's eyes in these close-ups, you actually see something strange happening in her eyes. That we called it the Galad-light, which was a device that Andrew Lesney, our DP, designed, and it was in every time you film an actor in close-up, you see a pinpoint of light reflected in their eyes. It's called the eye light, and it does a lot. You can see it in all these close-ups. It does a lot to bring the characters to life. But every time we shot close-ups with Kate, we didn't just have one light. We had like a Christmas tree lights all in a big circle, so that there'd be stars reflecting in her eyes, multiple light sources.
Not in that shot, though.
In that last shot?
No.
No, that was scary,
No,
Galadriel.
but you see it in all the other shots, though. That was a scary one.
Elizabeth Fraser is singing here, this lament.
What I like about what Howard did here is it's a lament by one voice answered by the others, which is really lovely. Choir, big.
What do they say about...
And as we carry on through this sequence, we are starting to see a longer version than what we saw in the theatres. Lovely little character beats. It is something that I regretted having to trim out of these moments where the characters can start to interact with each other a little bit more. And this sequence here, we just decided we didn't have the latitude to be able to include it in the movie. It's a moment that I always loved in the books, and it's a lovely way to honour Gandalf. This was obviously all shot in a studio. We built 3 large tree trunks, and I love the idea of the Fellowship camping beneath the roots of the tree. That they have this little sort of sleeping quarters, which is organically sort of within the base of the tree.
These borders are well protected.
I will find no rest here.
This was another important beat in our Aragorn-Boromir relationship story.
She spoke of my father.
You know, we always regarded Boromir as not being a villain in the slightest, but being somebody who has very legitimate reasons to want to have the ring. He you know, the one thing that the ring does is it acts as a temptation, and you can be a person with the strongest will and the soundest heart, and absolutely believe that this ring is the best thing for you, which is what Boromir does. I mean, he comes from a country which is under siege, where there's enormous pressure on having to come up with a weapon to fight the orcs who are besieging Minas Tirith and Osgiliath, and that he genuinely believes that this ring would solve all of their problems.
And underlying that even deeper is the fact that he has a father, and which we're just starting to set up here, is that his father...
Obviously, for those that know the book, The Return of the King has the character of Denethor, very, very prominent character in that story, which is our 3rd movie, and Denethor is Boromir's father.
And what's important here is that you're beginning to sense that Boromir is... that something is wrong with him. Boromir has a sense that there's something wrong with his father. And he's like any son that loves his father, is trying to sort out that internal conflict he feels between the growing madness of his father and what his father needs and desires of him. And it's a conflict that ends up tearing him apart. And that's how the ring works.
The Mirror of Galadriel, one of the very, very famous, iconic scenes from the book. It's a scene that, again, we manipulate the scene, I guess, to serve the interest of the film, maybe slightly more than how it plays in the book.
Yeah, well, we took Sam out of the scene.
Yeah, and we also introduced the elements of the scouring of the Shire in the scene as well.
Yes.
Because the scouring of the Shire, as the readers of the book will know, is a sequence that happens at the very end of the third book, and we don't have it in our movie. And yet we wanted to give the concept of what was at stake, and it is ultimately the Shire that's at stake in Frodo's heart, that he is doing what he's doing to protect his homeland. And so
Will you look into the mirror?
we use the mirror more so than what's in the book. We use the mirror in the film to show what would happen to the Shire should Sauron be victorious.
Shows many things.
One of the reasons Sam isn't here is because this is a critical scene for Frodo. This is the scene in which the full weight of what he must do, the decision that he faces, is clearly put to him by Galadriel. And that is the purpose, really, of their entrance into Lothlórien.
We also wanted to use this scene in a way to plant the seeds in Frodo's mind that the Fellowship cannot be trusted anymore, it can't be relied upon anymore, and that the only logical way forward for Frodo is really to break off from the others and to go alone. And we wanted the scene to end with a sense that Frodo, that was now a very definite option for Frodo.
But not so much that he can't trust them anymore. It's that if he stays with them, he will be the death of all of them. He can only bring them death by staying with them.
This is our homage to the scouring of the Shire. And this is the concept of what's going to happen to the hobbits should it's Sam and Rosie being led into the factory to a life of servitude in the Hobbiton steelworks. Which
is pretty much how Tolkien saw the transformation of Birmingham, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
From
the
this
Midlands,
pastoral,
beautiful Midlands countryside
to industrial hellhole.
I know what it is you saw.
I love the way that Kate plays the scene. I sort of love the mysteriousness and the intensity of it.
It is what will come to pass if you should fail.
I know there were some comments from people once they saw the movie feeling that Galadriel was a lot heavier and darker than she was in the books, and that's true to some extent. We did play her that way, but we also filmed a much lighter sequence where she gives gifts as the Fellowship leave, which was cut out of the original theatrical version of the film. But that does present much more of the Galadriel that I think people expected to see from the books.
She is perilous, though. I mean, Tolkien does describe her as dangerous. Yeah. She is a dangerous. And what she's saying, I think, to earn these lines where she does this transformation, where you could see what she could become, you needed this sense of the power that is in this woman. And her element here, if you look carefully, is water. If Gandalf is the servant of fire, Galadriel's element is water. And that was based on an Alan Lee, sort of working with Nyla Dixon, the costume designer. And they wanted her to look drowned, didn't you? A sense of... Yeah,
we wanted to make it very much a sense of water.
A siren.
A siren, exactly. Yeah. And when we say her element, one of the things that you see here, which was again not in the original cut, is the presence of Nenya, the ring of adamant, the ring, one of the 3 rings forged that you see at the very beginning in the prologue, and that is she is the keeper of Nenya. The other ring is held, of course, by Elrond, and his element is the sky. Velia, I think you say it. And the 3rd ring, the keeper of the 3rd ring shall be revealed.
This task was appointed to you, and if you do not find a way...
That is why she says to Frodo, to bear a ring of power is to be alone.
It's just... I'm afraid to do it.
Even the smallest person can change the course of the future.
The book hints at the concept of the Uruk-hai being created as an amalgam of orcs and goblin men.
Yes, we did. We went deeper into another mythology. We went into Tolkien's other writings to draw on this concept, that they were in fact once elves.
But we created the Uruk-hai really as being these formidable foe who do ultimately provide us with our climactic battle in the film, really. Lawrence McElroy, who plays Lurtz, does a most incredible job of bringing the prosthetics to life, because obviously he's covered in this makeup, and an actor can easily get drowned in the makeup and be lost inside it, but Lawrence was just an absolutely brilliant master at just punching, using all the energy in his natural performance to just punch through the rubber and the mask to bring this creature of Lurtz to life. I think he did it remarkably well. The
whole thing we were constantly trying to show is one of the reasons Saruman has fallen is just as Melkor fell. The original spirit of evil within the world fell is because of the jealousy of the power of life, the power of creation. And he's playing God, and that's what I love about the look in his eye in that scene between Saruman and Lurtz. Is he says, "And now perfected," meaning that he has that power. That power is now in him.
Genetic engineering.
Genetic engineering, exactly.
In
And
the
of
th- in
course,
the
Tolkien is saying, within the thing of his own faith, is that there is only one source of that power.
In the movie, we didn't pause for the Galadriel gift-giving, which is so memorable from the book. We just got the Fellowship on the river and away from Lothlórien, but we originally shot the gift-giving, and it actually appeared again in photographs, and I think some images from it even appeared in some early trailers. So it's good to be able to see these moments as they were originally shot. The cloaks that the Fellowship wear were given to them in Lothlórien, and in the movie version they suddenly just are wearing these cloaks, and there's no explanation for how they got them. The Lembas bread is significant because Lembas bread returns to the story in the 2nd and 3rd film, and we film sequences in those movies with the Lembas bread, and yet we never introduced it in the theatrical version of the Fellowship of the Ring. So this is another reason why I'm glad that this DVD has an opportunity of being seen by people prior to the release of The Two Towers. Because actually one of the very first scenes in The Two Towers between Frodo and Sam involves them eating Lembas bread. So at least people will have some concept of what that actually is now. This is where Aragorn gets his dagger, which he uses throughout the rest of this movie and the next 2 films. So it's nice to be able to see it being a gift from Celeborn. This was actually not a river at all, but it was a small pond that was in a country house called Fernside, north of Wellington. But it was a lovely pond surrounded by trees, so we thought it was a suitable location. Legolas gets his bow. Now Merry and Pippin get these daggers, which again form a significant moment in The Two Towers. So I'm glad that people are able to see these daggers being given. All of the gifts that Galadriel gives the Fellowship are actually used in the next 2 movies in different ways. And And so I was pretty adamant that I wanted to include all of these scenes in the DVD, because this rope, for instance, that Sam is being given does play a part in the Two Towers. And, the hope is that most people will get to look at this DVD and understand where these things came from as they look at the next films.
Except to look upon the Lady of the Galadriel one last time, for she is more fair than all the jewels.
This moment is a continuation of what we started in the flat with the moment between Gimli and Galadriel. It's lovely to see Kate smiling there too, because I know some of the criticism that people had of the Galadriel character in the theatrical version is the fact that she had this sort of slightly frightening, heavy persona, which it was appropriate for the scene that she was playing, but we did originally film these moments which are more like the Galadriel from the book, where she has a little bit more of a fun-loving spirit. And what a lot of people don't realise, certainly people that haven't read the book, is that Galadriel is in fact Arwen's grandmother. So if you can get your head around that Kate Blanchett is Liv Tyler's grandmother. And so the relationship between Aragorn and Arwen has some significance for Galadriel.
Darkness, with all that is left of your kin.
This was a scene that we filmed most of the scene in Elvish. It's a lovely language when it's spoken by actors who really get their tongues around it. Of the gift-giving, this was the only bit of the gift-giving that made it into the theatrical cut. But the phial of light that she is giving Frodo, we don't actually see that in the Two Towers, but it's sort of kept safely in his pocket all the time. But in the Return of the King, it will reappear.
May it be a light for you.
There's a sort of special bond between Galadriel and Frodo too, that Galadriel knows things that Frodo knows, and there's some, secrets shared between the two of them. She knows about the power of the ring. She knows how it's beginning to affect him.
I have taken my worst wound at this parting.
And here's the final beat of the little story between Gimli and Galadriel. It's, we could never really figure out a way of actually filming 3 of Galadriel's hairs that she gifts to Gimli, so we decided just to talk about them instead. In a sense, that was one of the things that we lost in trimming down the footage for the theatrical releases. We lost little character moments. Gimli falling in love with Galadriel, the way he does, I think, is really...
He does it so beautiful.
It is beautiful.
John Rhys Davies, fantastic.
These aerials were shot in a variety of different places through New Zealand. They're all done for real. There's no special effects involved here. Some of it was done in the North Island. Some of it was done in the South Island. We just sort of looked around for the most spectacular bits of river that we could find. The river journey in the book is a fairly leisurely affair which takes place over several days, and in the movie we kind of transformed it into a semi-chase scene, I guess. It's just quite interesting. I quite like the juxtaposition of the Uruks running on foot, desperate to catch up, and the Fellowship not really being totally aware that they're being pursued, who are taking this much slower journey down the river. I love the way that Orlando spins around and just senses the presence of the Uruks with his elven senses. We had a wonderful helicopter pilot, Alfie Spate, down in Te Anau, who was flying the chopper, filming all this stuff. It was very exciting. I was in the back of the chopper, zooming low over the treetops. It was a bit of an adrenaline rush, I'll tell you. We felt that the scene had a certain degree of redundancy, just from the concept that Gollum had already been identified in the mines of Moria as pursuing the Fellowship. Of course, what this does help us, because it does show that Gollum is still on their tail, And that's the way that we go into the Two Towers, because Gollum obviously makes an appearance very early on in the Two Towers, pursuing Frodo and Sam.
It'll make the crossing even more dangerous.
It also gave us these extra little character moments. This sequence here was designed to feed into the climax of the film, where Sam wades into the water and says, well, you know, I'm coming to Mordor with you, Mr. Frodo. And we deliberately wrote this scene as a way of almost making Frodo starting to distance himself from Sam, so a feeling that Frodo is now emotionally disengaging from his friends, from the rest of the Fellowship. You just trim these scenes out simply because you want to increase the pace, not because they're not helpful to the movie.
Get some sleep.
This was a scene that was potentially very helpful between Aragorn and Boromir, that we did feel that we wanted them to go into Amon Hen and into Boromir's ultimate sacrifice and death with a certain amount of estrangement. Because the last time we had a scene between these two characters, obviously it was a scene with much more warmth in the Lothlórien forest.
We wanted those two great characters to part on bad terms. It's almost like lovers. I mean, you know, that adds pathos, of course, to the death scene. But we didn't have time. Once you hit that river, the main reason to get rid of it is because you had to keep going.
Certainly there was a story momentum issue, but I think it also is that by the time we have left Lothlórien, their relationship has shifted and moved on. It has become more intimate. And in a way there is a degree of understanding between the two characters that doesn't speak to this bald argument on Riverbank, where they're still harping on about things that were really...
Well, that's it, but that is the seed. That is the ring again, working.
Well, it is. It was a
didn't,
difficult
yeah,
decision,
I know,
but
I agree with
in the
you.
end, I don't think it was the wrong decision.
No.
Long have I desired to look upon the kings.
The Argonath is another wonderful icon from the book. These were two miniatures, the statues that were about 7 foot tall, and we shot a plate on a boat down the river, and we had to track the miniatures, which means that we had to match the rocking of the boat. And when we shot our models, the models had to rock the same way, which was a bit of a trick, and wonderful piece of compositing was done by the Weta folk. But I love the size of the statues, and this shot in particular I wanted to do to make them feel really grand, to be flying up past the hand of one of the statues, and there's a little bird's nest in the eye. We came up with that birds had been nesting, and be frightened by the helicopter that's filming the shot. And Zeri. There's Tol Brandir, which is the finger of rock just above the falls of Rharos. We took a lot of care into trying to create Middle-earth in the way that Tolkien described it, so that no matter what anybody's feelings are about changes in the story, that you really felt that you had gone to Middle-earth and we'd gone there on location to shoot. I love the way that Sean and Elijah play this little moment where each of them know, they can sense what's about to happen.
We cross the lake at nightfall.
We spent a lot of time on this particular... It was Lake Mahora, was it? Mavora. But the first time we were in town, now we had the snows and the floods. And the second time we had this horrific earthquake. It's the only time I've ever seen the ground wave like a wave, undulate.
As far as the eye can see.
Gimli is really describing the terrain that Frodo and Sam find themselves on at the beginning of the Two Towers. His vivid description of what's in front of them is exactly what Frodo and Sam have to face very shortly.
Orcs patrol the eastern shore. We must wait for cover of darkness.
Michael Desky pointed out that Legolas is forever saying, we've got to keep moving, we should leave, and everyone always ignores him.
Yeah.
Yes, well, maybe they'll start to pay more attention to him in the future.
There's no heed to that, young hobbit.
Where's Frodo?
This sequence was shot again very early in the shoot. We found ourselves filming the climax of this movie within the first few weeks of starting to shoot the film, way back in 1999.
And Peter's great regret was that he didn't get the art department to make the body of that enormous head.
I know. I really do regret it, because I suggested that they make this giant big head that we could lie there, and then afterwards I thought, God, wouldn't it have been great if the whole body had been there, if this huge statue had just toppled over, crashed onto the forest floor and broken up. But, we had the whole body, and we could have used it in the fight scene. It would have been a great thing to have in the fight that's coming up, to have this huge statue there. But I didn't think of that till it was too late. It would have been pretty cool.
There are other ways, Frodo. Other paths that we might take.
I know what you would say. And it would seem like wisdom, but for the warning in my heart.
Warning?
This is a scene which is, very much shot as it is in the book. There's not a lot of liberties, apart from tweaking the dialogue here and there. It's one of those very memorable scenes from the book that we were able to take our lead straight from the writings of Tolkien.
Yeah.
If you would but lend me the ring.
No.
Why do you recoil? I am no thief.
In fact, we had a lot more of it, didn't we? It's been
Yeah,
cut
this
quite
is
a
a
bit.
shortened version of it.
You think you have? They will find you. They will take the ring. And you
This forest is a wonderfully ancient, mossy forest in a place called Paradise. Most of Paradise is a national park, and they don't really like film crews going there too much, but this particular piece is on private land, so the owner of the forest allowed us to shoot there. We were obviously very careful at trying to preserve it as much as we could, but it's just so lovely and green and mossy and very primordial.
I see your mind. You will take the ring to Sauron! You will betray us!
This was a very one of the first scenes that Sean shot, wasn't it? It was.
Yeah, the first major scene.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I remember when we were looking at the dailies, we were all blown away by how the power and energy he poured into to his performance in this scene.
Frodo.
The seeing seat on Amon Hen is a scene that we trimmed back before the film was finished. We originally shot exactly what's in the book, where Frodo looks in various directions and he sees trolls coming out of the mountains, and he sees orcs, and he sees the ships, the pirate ships coming up the river. And we pre-visualized that with our computer pre-visualization, and we filmed Frodo, but we never actually completed the effect shots, and we ultimately shortened the sequence to just being him seeing Barad-dûr and the Eye of Sauron, which is in the book, but we just felt we needed to get on with the story, so we never completed the other effect shots. The sequence with Aragorn talking to Frodo on Amon Hen, this is in the book, isn't it? But it's not quite as developed as it is here, but it's certainly the farewell between Aragorn and Frodo does happen in the book.
No.
Oh, it doesn't happen in the book?
No, this was...
okay. Is this a completely our adventure,
this is...
is that right? God, I always thought it was a little piece of it.
No, that was Fran and I. Remember one time we were just like, what the hell is wrong with this? What the hell is wrong with this? And we realised that one of the reasons for this particular scene is that we felt very strongly that early on, especially in earlier drafts before we started filming, that these two great characters who go on to carry the main story threads for the rest of the films needed this moment together.
It also it juxtaposes exactly what's happened with Boromir, in the sense that there's one man who was tempted by the ring and couldn't resist, and here is another man who is tempted by the ring at this moment, and he does resist it. He has got the strength to push it away. So it's also important for Aragorn, because in a way this actually proves something to Aragorn himself, that Aragorn can see that he does have the power to reject the ring when it's offered to him.
Yeah.
And that leads Aragorn then to believe that there is some strength in his own race.
Yes.
So in a sense, that moment for his character we felt was very important.
The other thing I think with this between the two of them is that he does say those great lines. I would have followed him to Mordor, into the very fires of Mordor, but he doesn't say it to Frodo, and it just seems such a waste to not actually say that to the one person that you meant to say it to. And I have to say, a lot of Tolkien scholars, a lot of people who real fans of the book have loved that scene and not objected to it at all, which is great.
It's hard to tell from the pictures, but this was actually shot on a massively hot summer's day. I mean, there were probably 40-degree temperatures, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and we were literally carrying Uruk-hais off the set who had fainted and all that, because you can imagine these poor guys wearing all that rubber and those leather costumes and stuff in the heat. It was very, very hot. I love the way that Legolas uses his arrows there to stab and to shoot two guys at once and things. We wanted Legolas to be, to really show what a great archer he was, and Orlando was able to pull that stuff off so well.
Again, this farewell was very important. It doesn't happen in the book, but we again felt was really important.
Come on!
And this was an important scene because, again, we felt that in the book this doesn't happen. This farewell, it's something that's talked about while Frodo's not there. And we wanted this moment, and I think especially the understanding between Merry and Frodo is very, very important, because it shows you that Merry, especially who's slightly brighter, shall we say, than Pippin, has an understanding of what it is that Frodo is doing, and with their usual extraordinary courage, these two little hobbits help their friend.
I wanted the Amon Hen location to feel ancient, so we built all these ruins on the hillside, because people don't realise that this hill was once a much grander structure, that the seeing seat at the top of Amon Hen was the climax of a place of worship in the Númenórean days.
It was the
Númenóreans
borders
first
of
arrived.
Gondor.
And
in fact, that's what the Argonath stood for, the border.
The border
borders
of
the
Gondor.
land.
This hill was a place of ancient worship, like a temple almost. So we evoked that by putting these polystyrene ruins all throughout the
fabulous.
hillside.
Was that Númenórean polystyrene?
And that was genuine Númenórean polystyrene.
Actually, they were borrowed from Weathertop because we ran out of
I
money.
know, we did. If you look very closely, it's a bit of recycling going on.
There is
Númenórean
actually.
recycling.
That is true. We did run out of ruins, so we brought Weathertop back into play. Yeah. The arrows that Legolas is firing are actually computer-generated arrows. He couldn't get them out of his quiver and notch them up fast enough. It just was not possible. And obviously we wanted them to fly and hit the Uruks as well. This is a cable cam shot. This is shot from a camera that is mounted on wires between two trees, and it's rolling down on pulleys. And it was remote controlled, and the camera just basically ran down, we call them flying foxes, like a pulley between two trees, over almost half a mile long. The Amon Hen fight was choreographed by our wonderful swordmaster Bob Anderson, who did a great job training all of the stunt guys who, we were using stuntmen who had done movies in New Zealand before but had never obviously used swords and axes and things, and our actors had to be trained up.
Sean Bean's used.
Well, Sean Bean has used the sword before. No, Sean was probably the most experienced of our sword-wielding actors. I like seeing Merry and Pippin use their swords a bit. It's very nice to have Merry and Pippin more interactive in what's going on rather than just being spectators. We shot more fighting on Amon Hen than what appeared obviously in the theatrical version, and I put a little bit of it back here. We still shot more than what you're even seeing here, but basically the fight can't go on too long. We do have to get on with the story, but there was a couple of nice little fight moments that we trimmed. Scenes like the throat cutting and the arm being chopped off were obviously trimmed back really for rating reasons. Boromir's last stand was a scene that I really wanted to capture from the book. This is where a character like Lurtz really comes in handy, because we could now make it personal, that it wasn't just an anonymous Uruk that was shooting Boromir with the arrows. It was this creature called Lurtz that we sort of knew, and we hated him already in a sense, so it makes it even more powerful.
And of course he resonates Saruman, because he's had so much to do with Saruman, that he is Saruman's creation, so that plays back to no other villain.
And Sean just did this sequence so incredibly well.
He's so good in this scene.
In a way, the inspiration for the soundtrack here was really a Heavenly Creatures inspiration. That the scene at the end of Heavenly Creatures when the mother is being led down the track by the two girls, we used the humming chorus and we sort of took all of the sounds away. And in a sense, I kept playing that in my mind over and over again when we were filming this. And so, you know, in some respects, I ended up treating this in a similar way in terms of the way that we distance the sound from the picture and we make it much more of a headspace kind of moment.
The choral piece under this is they're actually singing in Elvish some lines from the book, which is lines of Faramir's. I do not love the sword for its brightness or the arrow for its swiftness. I love only that which they defend. It's a beautiful sentiment under this moment.
Having created our villain in Lurtz, we obviously have to finish him off. And we were actually shooting two things at once, because whilst I was filming Boromir's Last Stand, Barry Osborne was just on the other side of the hill. We were only about 30 or 40 feet away. He was just over the hill on the other side of the slope filming the fight between Lurtz and Aragorn. So this was largely shot by Barry. Viggo did this incredibly well. There's a shot coming up where he had to hit the knife that gets thrown at him with his sword, and he did it first take. Like, that was a real knife that was being thrown, and he literally did bat it away with his sword for real. It wasn't anything fake about it. We do a little bit of computer enhancement here to take Lurtz's arm off.
We weren't allowed to have it spurting, though.
No spurting blood was allowed. I'm sure people are going to blame me for Lurtz licking his dagger, but that was actually filmed by Barry Osborne, and I have no responsibility for it at all. I can distance myself from that, although I do actually quite like it.
Frodo. Where is Frodo?
I let Frodo go.
Then you did what I could not. I tried to
This
take the ring from him.
moment between Boromir and Aragorn is iconic from the book. You know, you can read the book and imagine Boromir leaning against the base of the tree with the arrows in him, and Aragorn leaning over him. And
I think this moment is better than the moment in the book.
well,
I said it.
we definitely enhanced the dialogue. We made it
not just the dialogue, but I actually think the emotional content of this moment and the connection between these two characters, and I do think it was a failing of Professor Tolkien's. I wanted more when I read that moment in the book.
Yeah.
I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall.
As it is in the movie, the scene really becomes as much about Aragorn as it is about Boromir's death. That it's really a moment for Aragorn to declare to us, the audience, his intention now to embrace his birthright as a noble king of men, and to pursue that, which is obviously what Aragorn's story is over our next two movies.
And it's the simple identification with the world of men, our people, he says, and you can see, and Sean plays it so beautifully.
I would have followed you, my brother. My captain.
There's a very subtle thing that happens when Boromir dies here, which is coming up shortly, that on our colour timing, because we did all of our colour grading in a computer, we were able just to make his face go pale at the moment that he dies, just to take away a little bit of the colour.
That last line was, there were advocates to cut that last line, and it was very interesting that Sean really, really wanted that line. My brother, my captain, my king.
Oh, it's a great line. I really love it. I really love it. That's great. This is an image that I really like too, of the kiss on the forehead.
They will look for his coming from the White Tower, but he will not return.
The final moments with Frodo here before he decides to go on the boat, and then with Sam, was something that we actually ended up shooting this twice, didn't we? We shot a version of it where we made it much more of an action climax. A version that was it was not a good idea, and we realised it wasn't a good idea when it was shot. We actually had an Uruk-hai attacking Frodo in the water as he was attempting to escape in the boat. And
did we actually shoot that?
yeah, so half of it was shot.
You were down to the rehearsing the fight sequences.
No, we shot it. We definitely we filmed some of it, but it sort of just didn't really. It wasn't ultimately what this part of the story should be about. So it was reconceived, and we travelled back down to Lake Mavora doing pickups, and we actually shot the stuff. Well, it wasn't really doing pickups, was it? It was shot during the shoot. It was shot right at the very end of the shoot.
It was.
Well, what happened was initially we had a studio note. They were really worried about the closure of the story and whether the film would be satisfying to an audience. If it didn't have some kind of big action moment for Frodo. And so we promised to go away and have a think about it, and we wrote something which, we didn't feel wonderful about, but we thought maybe they're right. We didn't know. And as soon as we started to try and execute it, we realised it was completely wrong. Exactly. And we also understood that, having seen the footage that we did have cut together, what was needed. That it was this was entirely about the breaking of the fellowship, and it was an emotional climax to a story. It didn't have to have an action content.
And the great triumph for Frodo is not over some sort of Uruk-hai of Saruman's, but it is over the ring. It is when he grabs that ring and does not allow the ring to control him. So that it is, in a way, that's his great enemy. And that scene, that rewrite, as I said before, the great scenes, they write themselves. And that was an easy write. Once we wrote it, and we knew that we were going to hear Gandalf and hear that we knew exactly what he was hearing in his head. I remember we did it in like 10 minutes.
This sequence of Sean Astin underwater was actually shot in a studio dry. It's called Dry for Wet. He was in front of a blue screen with fans blowing on his cloak to make it billow around, and we put all of the water effects were added in later. So he wasn't having to worry about holding his breath. He was able to just act and concentrate on that. Now, the last sequence between Frodo and Sam on the boat here was actually directed by Fran. She was there on the day when this was shot, and I was about 300 miles away directing Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli chasing the Uruks at the beginning of film 2.
This was a thought afterwards to reprise Sam's lines from the cornfield. We wrote the cornfields sequence, which was just something that we sort of threw in there as a nice thought of setting up of Sam's feeling that he must protect Frodo, and when we actually came and rewrote it, and we wanted to resonate at this moment, which I think it does really well. But unfortunately, we got one word wrong, which is, don't you leave him, Samwise, which I think is much nicer at this moment. But earlier on he says, don't you lose him.
This was a rubber dummy of Sean Bean, because he wasn't around anymore when we shot that, but we did make a model of him.
I always thought there should have been some spray over there.
And this is the Niagara Falls that we... that's a Peruvian fall somewhere in South America. We had some footage of a barrel going over the Niagara Falls, and we used our computer to replace the barrel with Boromir's boat, computer version of Boromir's boat.
So Viggo's just put on Boromir's gauntlets.
Yes.
Which travel with him all through parts 2 and 3.
It's a bit of grave robbing.
Yep, he probably pulled his rings off. He probably took his wallet out of his pocket and put all his money in there. No, it's actually interesting because Viggo came up with the idea of wearing Boromir's gauntlets for scenes that we were doing in the second and third film. So we shot this much later, and so this was ultimately our opportunity to show him at the moment that he actually obtains the gauntlets.
And he has taken up the gauntlet.
Well, that's right.
Challenged by Boromir. It has layers, you see. There's lots of layers in this movie. If you look really hard.
And these 3 guys go running off into part 2, which is another story again of the chase across the Rohan Plains in part 2.
I love Gimli's laugh.
Yeah.
The best laugh. This is the old car park in Mount Ruapehu, isn't it, Pete?
Yes, this was we were in Mount Ruapehu filming Mordor scenes and Emyn Muil scenes from the second film, and so we picked up this shot while we were there for the end of part one. That's a real sunset behind them. This was actually shot at the very end of the day as the sun was going down.
I don't suppose we'll ever see them again. We may yet, Mr. Frodo. We may.
What I really like in this scene is the quality in Sean's performance, because you feel that Sam's really moving on now into the role of Frodo's protector, much more that he starts to take over, as in films 2 and 3. He becomes the driving force behind getting this mission completed, and
His will. You're starting to see his will.
yes,
How
you
the
are.
strength of that will.
And yes, you are. Yes,
Which is cool.
it's in his
In his eyes.
In his eyes.
Yeah. Yay.
So, it's interesting because, I mean, I don't really regard this version of the film as being the director's cut. I think that the term director's cut implies something that's not true, and, it implies that the director somehow wasn't happy first time round. And I was very happy with the theatrical version of the film. We had certain considerations because nobody wanted to release a movie that was too long or felt too long. The thing that I guess I missed from the theatrical version is that most of the trims we made were to do with the characters, were to do with little moments between Merry and Pippin, or Legolas and Gimli, Boromir and Aragorn. And so it is nice to have this alternate version of the Fellowship of the Ring, this longer version which has a lot of those moments fleshed out. And I think that the wonderful thing about the DVD format is the fact that it allows you to present an alternate version of the film. It doesn't replace the theatrical version. It simply allows people to see more of what the theatrical version was.
It's telling more of the tale. It's been able to show more of it.
It was a hugely daunting task to be taking on these books, and in a way we felt we had to give ourselves as much permission to deviate and as much creative latitude as possible. And so that was our starting off point. Don't be afraid to make changes. And we made a lot of changes. In our first passes, we thought, well, what do we need to do in order to get this functioning as a screen story? And then having done that on a few drafts, we started to feel secure enough to start to adjust the screenplays back to the book. It was like once we had a really firm sense of how the stories could play, it was like, okay, now retrieve it and make it the story that everybody knows and loves. And that was not a sort of conscious path that we plotted. It was just the way it organically happened, that we really wanted to give the fans of the book something that they would love, and a story that would reflect the book in a truthful way. And there's always a tension between doing that and also creating something which is cinematically satisfying. So we started off regarding the needs of cinema and then came back to the needs of the people who love this book. And hopefully we found some sort of balance.
Tackling this huge task was, it found its own path, it found its own level, and it was extraordinary the places you found yourself in with the old laptop open and pages and books scattered around, and there were many times where Fran, Peter and myself found ourselves on the sides of volcanoes with people walking around in prosthetics trying to do rewrites, and some hotel rooms. I remember you guys tried to go away for a holiday, which was like this fantasy you held on to in your heads that you were going to get a holiday in July of 2000 during the shooting. And I remember when you were packing cases full of tapes that you had to review, and of course we had the script just kept happening. But you held on to that dream.
Yes. Want to make a special mention of Brian Bansgrove, our gaffer, who is no longer with us, who was very loved by members of the crew, and and the cast, and he did a fantastic job on this film, and really we would have been sunk without him.
In a sense, filming The Lord of the Rings, the trilogy of The Lord of the Rings, all in one big hit, over 15 months, it was something that you would not normally do. Conventional wisdom would say don't do it. There were reasons that we did do it, reasons of economy, reasons of being able to release the films 1 year apart instead of 3 years apart. But it really made huge demands on everybody involved. And, the situation was simply one in which everybody just had to put their nose down and get their work done, including the cast. Everybody knew what they were involved in, and there was no room for people who were complaining, no room for people that found it too hard or too difficult. You just had to do your job with the minimum degree of fuss and not place added pressure on to anybody else. And I'm forever grateful for that, for the cast and the crew. And everybody was feeling stressed because it was so long, but they didn't dump it on me. They knew that I was carrying enough of my own, and so, it ended up being an incredibly arduous, long shoot, but with a minimal amount of complaining and a great spirit. Because I think everybody felt, well, I can't complain because the next person has got just as much of a problem as I have getting through this. And
I think the reason nobody complained, Pete, is because you were. I remember Elijah saying this. Whenever he got tired, he'd just look across at you and know that your day wasn't over. You had 4 hours of dailies to watch, and he always felt that if you could do it, he could do it. And I think a lot of them were doing it for you.
If you stopped to think too much about what you were involved in, you would start to worry about it, if you rationalise it too much. And it became a process of really just putting your head down and thinking about what you were doing in the next week. It was working like 1 week ahead. Lots of times as the pressure really went on that we would be walking onto sets and the paint wasn't even dry, I remember Alan Lee, our wonderful conceptual artist who did the most brilliant pencil sketches and delicate watercolour paintings of scenes. We arrived at the set of Rivendell, which was something that he had conceptualised and designed, and Grant Major had ultimately built it, and the set wasn't really finished at the time the trucks were arriving and the gear was being unloaded and the actors were in makeup, and Alan was there with a 5-inch paintbrush actually painting the set furiously, and then we'd be tell the crew, don't lean on this wall because the paint's not dry yet. And it was pretty much, it became something in which we planned for a long time. We knew what we were going into. We had a lot of it planned, but nonetheless it was a seat of your pants operation, really, that we were revising the script, we were editing the movie as we were going, figuring out ways to improve it all the time. The art department got to the point that they started the movie with lots of sets built and complete, but of course as the schedule moved on they had less and less time because sets would have to be torn down and that studio space would have to be turned into a different set. They got to the point that they were building huge sets from scratch in the space of 5 or 6 days, from nothing to us being on the set shooting. The fact that it was 3 films at once certainly created this rolling steam train that you just couldn't jump off it. It was rolling and it was just going to go with you or without you. And you had to somehow keep running in front of the train, laying the tracks.
This was a crew that always went there and had faith in that sudden inspiration.
The head of physical production for The Lord of the Rings at New Line was Carla Fry, an incredibly courageous, wonderful lady who really was responsible for steering us through the process that led to the green light of the film, and then supervised the production of all 3 movies through to the completion. And unfortunately, Carla succumbed to cancer about 4 months after the premiere of The Fellowship of the Ring. So our thoughts are always with her when we see the film, and certainly she was very heavily involved in the next 2 movies as well. So I hope in some way these films are a legacy for Carla, because she certainly she deserves all of our thanks and respect for the work that she did. We'll see you around next time on the commentary for The Two Towers, which we do need to get back and finish that film. So I'll say goodbye now, rush off, finish The Two Towers, and we'll all talk again at some point, I'm sure. So bye-bye, everybody. Till next time.